So why publish, and what are you going to publish? As I said, if you don't publish your research to the outside world, it never happened. You could say to someone, I did a great research project. Oh, fine, yeah, where did you publish it? Well, we haven't yet, it's still in the drawer. I did it 10 years ago. No one's interested. If you haven't published it to the outside world, it never happened. So that's the basic process of why you're going to publish. And what are you going to publish? You're going to publish useful material. And that's the important thing. What's useful? Everyone has a different perception of what's useful. But in terms of your personal reason for publishing, to get a degree, the norm. It could be you can do the Scandinavian model, publish 3 papers, you write the introduction and the conclusion, and you defend that. But normally, you publish in parallel to your thesis. And if you are publishing papers during your research to write your thesis, what's happening is that answers the question of the examiner who says, is this research publishable? If you've published it already, they know, yes, it is, great. Funding. There's never enough funding, and you might be lucky that you're working in a lab that has good funding, but many of the senior researchers have to apply for funding again and again and again. It's very complicated, and it's not as successful as it used to be. And to get funding, the funding bodies look for 2 things. They look at who you are and what you want the money for. What you want the money for is you're saying, I want the money, and this much money for this particular research project. And you're then describing very carefully what you expect to get out of this. And then who you are is not if you have a nice Facebook page or something, but actually, what have you done as a research team? Where have you published? What's your publication history? Publication history per person is there forever in a public record, and that's what's looked at by funding bodies when they think about whether they're going to be funding you or not. The strength of the application and who is asking for this money. The same thing with the promotion. If you're after, say, to be on permanent faculty, then you may be applying for some sort of a position there, and you probably have 200 other people doing the same thing. How are you going to stand out? Partly by the strength of your application, and secondly, by your publication history. That combination is there. So again, what you've published is part of who you are as a scientist. It doesn't go away, it's always there. And so that, in effect, is that sort of invisible currency and value. It's like sort of your own Bitcoin, basically, of who you are and what you've done. And of course, it could be some question, it could be some private, personal thing while you're doing it. Perhaps your mother was a famous scientist and you're following in her footsteps. Great, wonderful. But the reality is, it doesn't matter, because once it's been through peer review, then the majority of papers are good. So there's a few aren't, but most are good. And then what happens there is if you find it in a peer-reviewed journal or a peer-reviewed book, you can assume it's actually okay. You can assume that what's there is valid. You can then see what's there, take the information, and use it in your research studies. And don't really care about why you did it. If you pick up a journal article online and read it through, you're looking at what's in it for you. You're not thinking, I wonder if this person has a famous mother. Of course not. You're wondering about, can I use that figure somewhere? Is this a very interesting conclusion, interesting discussion? What future experiments should be done, suggested by these authors? That's what you're reading it for. No one reads scientific articles for fun. If you do, you should get a social life. Because normally, you're reading it, what can you get out of it? What can you learn from this to help you and your research team get better? That's what it's all about. So why publishing? Because you've got to be seen to be there. What are you going to publish? New work, original work, a new method. Everyone loves a new method. Or you write a review or a summary of a topic. You could do sound science publishing. You publish in something like PLOS ONE or Helion or something, whereby it's just, you publish it because it's not wrong. But it's far better if you can make your manuscript advance the knowledge of the field. If the field is expanding, why do a Me Too paper if you can do something better? So always try and do something better, something unknown to what's out there. What you should not be publishing is things that are out of date, things that aren't scientific. Not scientific things, that's what blogs are for. But for scientific research, that's peer-reviewed journals. And out-of-date things, if it's published in a certain way and it's been repeated what's been done before, or you're saying something and someone else has done something better and newer and more up to date, you shouldn't publish that. You find something else to publish. If you published it once is enough, not twice, once. It's findable electronically, so therefore you don't need to do it twice. And of course, anything that's incorrect, illogical, wrong, we don't want to know. And so you are working in a very interesting environment. It's very collaborative, but it's very competitive. You're collaborating with people, but you're competing to get into journals. There are 3% more scientists every year, and there's writing a bit more, about 4% articles in general, and there's less growth of journals than that, so there's much more competition. So if you look back, say, 30 years, so some of perhaps the senior faculty in their earlier days can look back and they found it very easy to publish. Because in those days, 30% of the papers that were submitted got rejected. 70% got accepted. Now it's the reverse. Now 70% get rejected and 30% get published. Is that fair? No, but that's the reality. So how can you be in the 30% is the question. That's what we're going to talk about today. How can you be in the 30%? You've got to have a very strong, effective manuscript. Solid, powerful, explains what you've done in a very clear way. So a good paper, a good manuscript, once it's accepted, a manuscript becomes a paper. A good manuscript, a good paper, has got great content and it's explained very carefully. If you've got great content and don't explain it, what a waste of your data. If you've got a great layout and style and clarity of explaining things and almost nothing in it, it's hollow paper, it's also a waste. It's the combination you need to actually make you stand out against the other articles that will be submitted to that journal on that particular period. So a strong manuscript is actually, it's simple really. It's got to be novel, clear, useful and exciting. Novel, new of course, new material if we can, not Me Too papers. Clear, the clarity, understanding, of course we're writing in English normally. Most people English is second language, so therefore it has to be as clear as you can, so there's no room for error. Useful of course, helpful to the researchers, and exciting, not just boring. And scientists in general are not exciting people, we're not, we know we're not. But we can actually write in an exciting way about the things we've found. We can be inspired by what we've actually discovered to explain it in an exciting way. That's the important thing. And also you've got to present it in a very clear way. You're not writing a thriller, a novel, whereby there's a plot twist at the end and no one saw it coming. You actually got to be taking the reader by the hand, saying, dear reader, here's what the problem was, here's what we did, here's what we found, here's what you think is going on, what do you think? That logical line running through the paper is actually the clarity you need to have to explain to the readers, so they can be interested in what you've done. Exciting message, explained clearly. And of course, so, the problem with most people, in speech or written, we tend to be very implicit. We just sort of assume people will know things. Well, I'm sure that the referees will notice that that second figure, the graph's a bit different, that's what it's all about. They'll find that. That's not good enough. You really got to have the idea, how can I be explicit and clear, here's what I found, here's what we found, here's what we think's going on. And that is the idea of the scientific significance. It's got to be really, really easy to spot, not just tucked away in a little conclusion, but everywhere. In the abstract, in the discussion, in the conclusion, the explicit information in a very, very strong, exciting way. Because otherwise, it'll just not show up, it'll just be lost in the sort of the noise of the scientific publishing process. To get out there into the wide world, you've got to go through peer review. Before you go through peer review, you've got to make sure that the editors are happy with what you sent in, are willing to send it out for peer review, and the reviewers are happy with what you've written, and then make their comments so you can improve the paper so it gets accepted. Everyone's busy. All people are busy people everywhere. Most editors, of course, are not full-time. There's a tiny fraction of a percent work full-time as editors. The rest are all full-time scientists. They're teaching, they're writing, they're presenting at conferences, they are writing grant proposals, the whole thing. And in their spare time, they get papers coming in to look at those to see what's good enough for their journal. And then they send it out to a reviewer with a similar sort of time problems and pressures to review. So that whole process is liable to be disrupted easily by pressure of work and everything else. So if you can actually send a good, strong paper in, clearly written, well laid out, a very strong message in there, you're halfway there to getting your paper sent out for peer review. Of course, the scientific content we looked at by the referees, but the first step is to get it past the editor filter to make sure it's clear enough, good enough to send out there. And if you saw some of the junk that gets sent in to editors, you'd understand why there's such a high level of desk reject. And so that's very so a useful thing about being a referee. You can see all the junk that comes in. But the thing about the editors, they say great paper laid out is compared to all the junk that came in the same morning, then that's much more likely to go out for peer review.